The journal smelled of leather and decades-old tobacco, its pages brittle as autumn leaves. Elena Rostova held it carefully under the desk lamp in her apartment, her fingers trembling slightly as she turned each yellowed page. Her mother had found it while cleaning out her grandmother's attic in Buffalo, a small, leather-bound book that had survived 3 generations and an ocean crossing. March 17, 1944, she read aloud to herself. The guns sang their symphony again tonight. 27 batteries fired in coordination. The earth itself seemed to weep beneath the thunder of our cannons. But it is not the artillery that haunts my dreams. It is her face, Catherine's face, when she bandaged my hands after the loading accident. Elena's heart quickened. She'd known her great-grandfather Victor had served in World War II, but family stories had always been vague, tinged with sadness. He was listed as missing in action in late 1944, presumed dead. Yet here was his journal, intimate and alive with details no official record could capture. She photographed several pages and uploaded them to a military history forum she frequented. Within hours, a response appeared from someone named M. Webb Films. Those coordinates match a field hospital I'm researching for a documentary. My great-grandmother Catherine served there as a nurse with the Allied Medical Corps. Do you have more information about the artillery officer who wrote this? Elena stared at the message. Catherine. The same name. 3 days later, she sat across from Marcus Webb in a coffee shop near Northwestern University, where she taught military history. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35 to her 38, with thoughtful gray eyes and hands that moved expressively when he talked. Between them lay 2 piles of documents, her great-grandfather's journal and his great-grandmother's letters. Listen to this, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. He read from a faded envelope. My dearest Victor, your hands will heal, but I wonder if my heart will when this terrible war finally ends. You asked me yesterday if I believed in fate. I do now. What else could explain finding you here, in this place of death, and feeling so completely alive? Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She opened Victor's journal to a corresponding date. He wrote back to her, when the cannons fire, I think of you, not because you are war, but because you are what comes after. The reason we fight, the promise of peace, the hope that this thunder will one day be silenced. Marcus leaned back, running his hand through his dark hair. This is incredible. They were really in love. But how did it end? Elena flipped through more pages, her historian's mind racing. He stops writing in November 1944, right after the Battle of... She paused, checking her notes. The Battle of Debrecen. Massive Soviet artillery offensive. Marcus pulled out his laptop, typing rapidly. Catherine's letters stop around the same time, but he frowned at the screen. There's a gap in her diary. Several months missing. Then she writes about leaving Europe in 1946, about giving up hope. Victor was reported missing, Elena said quietly. My grandmother always said he died in that battle. But what if he didn't? Marcus's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a shared purpose, a connection forming through the tragedy of their ancestors. What if he survived and they just never found each other? Elena felt a chill despite the warm coffee shop. Then we need to find out what really happened. We? Marcus smiled slightly. I'm a historian. You're a filmmaker. Between us, we can trace their story. She hesitated, then added, I need to know why my great-grandfather never came home. Don't you want to know why your great-grandmother carried such sadness? Marcus nodded slowly. My grandmother, Catherine's daughter, used to say her mother would sometimes stand at the window during thunderstorms, crying. She never explained why. The cannons, Elena whispered. She was remembering the artillery fire. They sat in silence for a moment, surrounded by the mundane sounds of the coffee shop, espresso machines hissing, conversations humming, while decades of grief echoed between them through paper and ink. There's a military archive in Lviv, Elena finally said. If Victor's unit was in that region, there might be records. Survivor lists, hospital transfers, anything. I have contacts at the International Red Cross Historical Division, Marcus offered. They've been helping with my documentary research. Maybe they can trace Catherine's movements after the war. Elena looked at the journal again, at her great-grandfather's careful handwriting, and felt the weight of unfinished history pressing on her shoulders. When can you leave? Marcus pulled out his phone, checking his calendar. I can shift my current project. 2 weeks? 2 weeks, Elena agreed, and as they shook hands, she felt an inexplicable warmth spread through her palm. She quickly pulled away, unsettled. This was research, nothing more. The romance was in the past, buried with Victor's bones somewhere in Eastern Europe. But as she walked home that evening, Victor's words echoed in her mind. I wonder if love can transcend time, if it can reach across death itself to find completion. She shivered and quickened her pace, not sure if she was running toward the truth or away from something she wasn't ready to name. The airplane descended through thick clouds over Lviv, and Elena pressed her forehead against the cold window, watching the patchwork of fields and forests emerge below. Somewhere down there, 79 years ago, her great-grandfather had commanded artillery batteries that shook the earth. Somewhere down there, he had fallen in love. Marcus sat beside her, reviewing footage on his camera. They'd barely spoken during the long flight from Chicago, each lost in their own research, but Elena found herself acutely aware of his presence. The way he tapped his pen against his notebook, the faint scent of his coffee, the focused intensity in his expression. Look at this, Marcus said suddenly, turning his tablet toward her. On the screen was a grainy photograph of a field hospital, white tents marked with red crosses, nurses in mud-stained uniforms. I found it in Catherine's effects. She wrote, on the back, where I learned that love and death are neighbors. Elena studied the image, then pulled out her phone. Victor drew a map in his journal. See these coordinates? She showed him a sketch of intersecting roads and a river bend. I think it's the same location. Their eyes met, and Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, not the polite professional expression they'd been exchanging. We're actually doing this. We're actually doing this, Elena echoed, and felt her own lips curve upward. The archive in Lviv was housed in a Soviet-era building with peeling paint and fluorescent lights that hummed like dying insects. The archivist, a woman named Oksana with sharp eyes and graying hair, led them down concrete stairs into the basement where military records were stored in endless rows of filing cabinets. You are looking for Soviet artillery officer? Oksana asked in heavily accented English. From 1944, many records were destroyed. Fire, war, deliberate burning by KGB. We have his name and unit designation, Elena said, handing over the information she'd compiled. Victor Rostov, 47th Guards Artillery Brigade. Oksana disappeared into the maze of files. Elena and Marcus stood in the dim basement, surrounded by the ghosts of war. The silence felt heavy, expectant. My grandmother used to tell me stories about Catherine, Marcus said quietly. She said her mother would wake up screaming sometimes, calling out a name they couldn't understand. Russian words. They thought it was just war trauma. She was calling for Victor, Elena said softly. For 70 years? Elena didn't answer. The enormity of that grief felt too large for words. Oksana returned carrying a dusty folder. I find something. Not much, but something. She laid papers on a scarred wooden table. Victor Rostov, reported missing November 12, 1944, during offensive near Debrecen. But look, here is transfer order, dated November 15th. Elena's hands shook as she lifted the document. Transfer order? But he was listed as missing. Chaos of war, Oksana said with a shrug. Sometimes paper gets separated from person. This says, Victor Rostov transferred to military hospital in Budapest. Severe wounds. Artillery shell explosion. Marcus leaned over Elena's shoulder to read, close enough that she could feel his warmth. He survived the battle. Then where did he go? Elena whispered. Oksana tapped another paper. Hospital records show he was discharged in March 1945. After that, she spread her hands. Nothing. No death certificate, no reassignment, no pension records. He disappeared. Elena felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. Victor had survived, but he'd vanished anyway, like smoke dissipating in wind. They spent 3 more days in Lviv, piecing together fragments. They visited the actual site where Victor's artillery unit had been positioned, now a farmer's field with wheat growing over old bomb craters. Marcus filmed everything while Elena measured distances and checked them against Victor's maps. On their 4th day, they drove to the location where the field hospital had stood. It was now a small village, rebuilt after the war. An elderly man named Petro, who'd been a child during the occupation, agreed to show them around. Germans were here, then Soviets, then Germans again, Petro said, walking them through what had once been the hospital grounds. Much fighting, much death. He stopped at a stone marker. But there was also love. My mother told me stories of a Russian officer who came looking for a nurse. After the war, maybe 1946 or 1947. Elena's heart stopped. A Russian officer? Yes. He had burns on his hands, my mother said. Scars. He showed everyone a photograph, asking if anyone knew where the American nurse had gone, the one with light hair and green eyes. Marcus grabbed Elena's arm. Catherine had green eyes. It's in her passport photo. Did your mother know what happened to him? Elena asked urgently. Petro shook his head sadly. He left after 3 days. Someone told him the Americans had all gone home. He walked toward the train station and no one saw him again. That evening, they sat in their small hotel restaurant, neither touching their food. The weight of what they'd learned pressed down on them like the winter sky outside. He was looking for her, Marcus said, his voice rough. While she was in America, thinking he was dead, he was searching. Elena pulled out Catherine's diary, which Marcus had brought. She found the entry from 1946. I am leaving tomorrow for New York. Mother insists I must move forward, must forget, must live. But how can I forget the man who made me believe in something beyond this carnage? I will carry Victor in my heart until my last breath, and I pray that somewhere, somehow, he knows I waited. I waited as long as I could. Tears streamed down Elena's face. Across the table, Marcus's eyes were bright with moisture too. They were both looking, Elena whispered, just in different places. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were warm, steady. Elena, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Being here with you, following their story. I keep thinking about chance and choice, about how close they came and how completely they missed each other. Elena knew she should pull her hand away. This was research, professional collaboration. But she didn't move. What are you saying? I'm saying I understand now why my grandmother looked so sad when she talked about her mother, that kind of loss. It echoes through generations. He squeezed her hand gently. But I'm also saying that maybe we're here for more than just research. Elena's breath caught. Outside, thunder rumbled, a spring storm rolling in from the east. The sound made her think of Victor's words about cannons and Catherine's tears during thunderstorms. Marcus, we barely know each other. I know you take your coffee black. I know you get a crease between your eyebrows when you're reading something that troubles you. I know you cry when you discover that two people who loved each other never got their happy ending. He smiled sadly. And I know that every time I look at you, I feel like I'm discovering something I didn't know I'd been searching for. The thunder rumbled again, closer now. Elena thought about fate and chance, about love letters and artillery. Fire, about two people separated by war and circumstance. We should focus on the research, she said, but she didn't pull her hand away. Of course, Marcus agreed, but his thumb traced a gentle circle on her palm. They sat like that as rain began to fall, two historians holding hands across a table. In Ukraine, surrounded by ghosts and unfinished stories, neither quite willing to acknowledge what was growing between them, neither quite able to let go. The train to Minsk rattled through the Belarusian countryside, past birch forests and villages that seemed frozen in time. Elena stared out the window, watching her reflection merge with the passing landscape. Beside her, Marcus was asleep, his head tilted against the seat, his breathing steady and peaceful. She allowed herself to study him, really look at him, in a way she hadn't permitted before. The strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the slight smile that played at his lips even in sleep. 3 weeks they'd been traveling together now, and every day the professional distance between them eroded a little more. Last night in Kiev, after dinner, they'd walked along the Dnieper River. Marcus had told her about his failed engagement 2 years ago, how his fiancée had left him because he was too obsessed with the past. Elena had shared her own story, a divorce at 33, her ex-husband claiming she loved dead soldiers more than living people. "Maybe we're both guilty of loving ghosts," Marcus had said. And in the lamplight, his eyes had held a question she wasn't ready to answer. The train lurched, and Marcus woke, blinking in confusion before his gaze settled on her. "Did I miss anything?" "Just trees and history," Elena said softly. They arrived in Minsk during a cold rain. Their contact, a researcher named Dmitry Volkov, met them at the station with an umbrella and a grave expression. "I found what you were looking for," Dmitry said without preamble. "But I must warn you, sometimes the truth is harder than the mystery." He drove them to an archive housed in a former KGB building, its walls still bearing the institutional gray paint of Soviet authority. In a cramped office smelling of old paper and strong tea, Dmitry laid out a file. "Viktor Rostov," he said, opening the folder. "After he was discharged from the hospital in Budapest in 1945, he spent the next 40 years searching for Catherine Marsh. I have compiled his movements from various sources, residence permits, employment records, even some KGB surveillance files." Elena's hands trembled as she picked up the first document. It was a residency permit from Warsaw, dated 1947. He went to Poland, yes, then Austria, then Germany, then France. Always moving, always asking questions. Dmitry pulled out a stack of photographs. These were found in his belongings when he died. The first photograph took Elena's breath away. It was Catherine, young, beautiful, standing in front of the field hospital in her nurse's uniform, smiling at whoever held the camera. On the back, in Victor's handwriting, my North Star. "Warsaw, 1947, still searching." Marcus leaned closer. His shoulder pressed against Elena's. He carried her picture everywhere. "Look at the dates," Dmitry said quietly, spreading out more photographs. The same image, worn and faded, with new locations and dates written on the back. "Paris, 1952, Berlin, 1958, Vienna, 1963, Prague, 1971. He never stopped searching." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. 40 years? 41, actually. Dmitry pulled out a final document. Viktor Rostov died in Minsk in 1986 at age 73. Heart attack. He had been working as a translator, living in a small apartment near the train station. When they found him, he was holding this photograph and a bundle of letters. Letters? Marcus's voice cracked. Letters he had written to Catherine over the decades, but never sent, because he had no address. The landlord kept them, not knowing what else to do with them. They were donated to the archive 5 years ago. Dmitry placed a cardboard box on the table. Inside were hundreds of letters, carefully preserved, written in Russian and broken English. Elena picked up the first one with shaking hands. "My dearest Catherine," she read aloud, translating haltingly. "It is 1949, and I have searched every hospital, every Red Cross office, every displaced persons camp in Europe. I know you are alive. I feel it in my bones the way I once felt incoming artillery. You are alive, and I will find you. I dream of the day when I can place this letter in your hands rather than in this drawer where I keep all my unsent words. Until then, know that every sunset I see, I imagine you seeing it too, somewhere across this vast world. Your devoted Victor." Marcus buried his face in his hands. Elena wanted to comfort him, but she was drowning in her own grief. She picked up another letter, this one from 1962. "My Catherine, I am 50 years old today. Half a century on this earth, and the best moments of my life remain those weeks we had together in 1944. I have built a life here, teaching, translating, existing. But I am not truly alive. I am the ghost of the man who loved you. Sometimes I wonder if you are searching for me too, or if you have moved on, married, built a family. I hope you have. I hope you found happiness, even as I remain suspended in the moment we were separated. The cannons have long since fallen silent, but in my heart they still echo, marking the rhythm of a love that time cannot erase. Stop, Marcus said hoarsely. Please, stop. But Elena continued to another letter, compelled by a terrible need to bear witness. This one was dated 1985, 1 year before Victor's death. My Catherine, I am an old man now, and I feel death approaching like an old friend. I have failed to find you in this life. But perhaps there is another chance beyond this one. I do not regret searching. Every city I visited, every face I studied hoping it was yours, these were not wasted years. They were a testament, Love is not measured in time together, but in devotion across time apart. If you ever find these letters, know that you were loved purely, completely, and eternally. Know that I waited. Know that I never stopped believing. You're forever, Victor. The silence in the room was absolute. Rain drummed against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. There's more, Dmitri said quietly. He pulled out another file. I took the liberty of researching Catherine Marsh as well. Marcus looked up, his face pale. What did you find? She married in 1951, an American doctor named Robert Webb, your grandfather. Dmitri's voice was gentle. They had 2 children, lived in Buffalo, New York. By all accounts, it was a good marriage, but he placed a small leather journal on the table, different from the one Elena had found. Smaller, more personal. This was Catherine's diary from 1949 to 1992. Her daughter, your grandmother, Marcus, donated it to a women's history archive before she died. I made inquiries. They sent me copies. Marcus opened it with trembling hands. The first entry made him close his eyes in pain. Elena read over his shoulder. I am marrying Robert tomorrow. He is kind and he loves me, and Mother says I must move forward with my life. But Victor's ghost stands between us even now. I will be a good wife. I will build a good life. But part of my heart will always remain in that field hospital, bandaging the hands of an artillery officer who made me believe in something beyond survival. I am sorry, Victor. I am sorry I did not wait longer. I am sorry I will never know if you lived or died. I am sorry we were born into a world at war. Marcus flipped through the pages. There were decades of entries, chronicling her children's births, family vacations, ordinary life. But scattered throughout were passages that revealed the truth beneath the surface. Butchery 3. Robert asked me today why I cried during thunderstorms. I told him it reminds me of the war. But it's not the war I'm remembering. It's Victor's voice saying that artillery fire was like music, terrible and beautiful. I wonder if he hears thunder and thinks of me too. 1975. I saw a Russian man at the grocery store today, and for one heartbreaking moment, I thought it was Victor. I actually called out his name. The man looked at me strangely, and I had to apologize. I am 60 years old, and I am still haunted by a love that lasted less than 3 months. What does that say about me? What does that say about the power of those few weeks we had? 1989. Robert died today. He was a good husband, and I did love him. The way one loves shelter in a storm, steady and grateful. But I never loved him the way I loved Victor. Is that wrong? Am I a terrible person for thinking of another man, even as I mourn my husband? Tonight I pulled out the letters Victor wrote me during the war, the only ones I have. I read them by candlelight and let myself remember what it felt like to be truly, completely alive. The final entry was dated 1992, just months before Catherine's death. I am dying. Cancer, the doctors say. I am not afraid. If there is anything beyond this life, perhaps I will finally get my answers. Perhaps I will see Victor again, young and whole, with his hands scarred from loading artillery shells. Perhaps he will smile at me the way he did that first morning, when I changed his bandages and he said I had the gentlest touch he'd ever known. I kept his letters hidden all these years, unable to throw them away, unable to share them. They are buried in the attic, along with the photograph of him I stole from the hospital records. When I die, someone will find them and wonder about the Russian officer who made me believe in love during the darkest days of war. I hope they understand. I hope they know that some loves are too big for one lifetime. Elena and Marcus sat in stunned silence, surrounded by the documentary evidence of 2 lives spent longing for each other, searching in different hemispheres, growing old separately while bound together by invisible threads of devotion. They were both searching. Marcus finally whispered. All those years. She in memory, he in reality, and they never knew. Elena touched the stack of unsent letters, feeling the weight of Victor's undelivered words. What do we do with this? Dmitri cleared his throat. That is why I contacted you. Victor is buried in a cemetery here in Minsk. A simple grave. No family to tend it. I thought perhaps we have to bring them together. Marcus said suddenly, standing up with new energy. Catherine's letters to Victor, Victor's letters to Catherine. They need to be reunited, even if their bodies cannot be. Elena stood too, understanding flooding through her. We bury the letters with Victor. We tell Catherine's story at his grave. And we tell Victor's story at her grave in Buffalo, Marcus added. We become the messengers they never had. They looked at each other across the table, and in that moment, Elena felt something shift between them. The grief they shared for their ancestors had become something else, a recognition of the preciousness of chance, the fragility of connection, the terrible cost of missed opportunities. "Marcus," she said softly, "we can't let what happened to them happen to us." He moved around the table and took her hands, the same hands that had held Victor's unsent letters, that had traced Catherine's diary entries. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we've been circling each other for weeks, pretending this is just research, just professional interest. But it's not." She squeezed his hands. "I don't believe in destiny. I don't think we were fated to meet because of our grandparents. But I do believe in choice, and I choose not to waste the chance we've been given." Outside, the rain intensified, thunder rolling across the Belarusian sky. But instead of making Elena think of cannons and war, it made her think of two people standing in the present, holding hands, refusing to let history repeat itself. Marcus pulled her close, and she rested her forehead against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "We honor them by living," he murmured into her hair, "by not letting fear or distance or circumstance separate us the way it separated them." Elena looked up at him, tears and hope mingling in her eyes. "So what do we do now?" Marcus smiled, a real smile full of possibility. "We finish their story, and then we write our own." In the corner of the archive, surrounded by decades of longing preserved in paper and ink, they kissed for the first time, tasting salt tears and new beginnings, while thunder rolled overhead like distant artillery fire, no longer frightening but full of promise.